All right. So, I think today what we want to do is answer a question that comes up with me and Chris a lot as we work with founders, CEOs, CTOs, and other executives of technology startups and SaaS companies that are scaling their business. And it is, should they hire a vCISO? Should they build a team? Or should they just keep trying to do it themselves? And what factors should they consider if they try to go down the route of hiring a vCISO? A little bit of context as we go in this. Me and Chris talked about it. I think the format we want this to take is really like if we're sitting at a coffee shop having a one-on-one with another technology executive, like what would we recommend behind closed doors? We do offer vCISO services, but this truly isn't like meant to get you to buy our services. We want to give you the real talk, the inside scoop of how we think companies should approach this problem. So as we go through that, that's the type of conversation that we want to have. So I hope that helps with some context. We'll start off with just some quick intros so you know why me and Chris are good candidates to talk about this and an agenda. But in way of agenda, we'll do some intros here in just a second. We're going to kind of frame this problem up and talk about what the problem you're probably experiencing today and how that's causing some challenges. We'll give you three options: the do nothing option, keep doing it as a shared duty amongst your existing team. We'll talk about how to think about if you should hire full-time employees or not, and then how to think about if you should hire vCISO if that's a good fit. And if you do decide to hire an outside party, we're going to talk about some things you should look for. So we'll give you our take on the 5 things to look for in a vCISO. And then we'll give you some resources, some real world examples where we've had a very similar conversation to this with some of our customers who've went through this process. So if you want to look at those resources outside of this, you can do that. In way of quick intros, my name is Christian Hyatt. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Risk360. So Risk360 has done something like over the last 10 years, about 2,000 engagements. We've helped organizations build programs. We've helped hundreds of organizations and worked directly with founders and executives think through their security program on vCISO projects. So I think just a lot of experience, a pretty big sample size in terms of our ability to talk about this problem. Chris, want to do a quick intro?
Yeah, absolutely. So good. It's afternoon where I am by 4 minutes. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Donaldson. I lead our vCISO practice. So I've been in the security space for about over 10 years at this point. Seen everything from Fortune 50 companies all the way down to startups, scale ups, and everything, pretty much everything in between. So really excited. This is definitely a problem, as Christian talked about, like that we hear all the time, and there's not a cookie cutter answer for it. There's a lot of considerations, a lot of specific things that CTOs, CISOs need to think about as they're tasked with different objectives. So we're excited to dive into that today.
Yep. I'll give you all a quick intro. I won't cover this too long, but if you're just wondering who Risk360 is, bottom line is we help organizations with kind of 2 areas of their business, either achieving compliance objectives. So the whole alphabet soup of different compliance requirements, from harmonizing frameworks across multiple frameworks to SOC 2, ISO, PCI, high trust, almost name it. We are probably working in those frameworks. And then we also help organizations with their cybersecurity risk management programs. So that could be in the form of transforming the programs, offering vCISO services. We have a super talented offensive security team. So if you need help with penetration testing or red teaming or anything like that, we help with that. We help coach CISOs through a CISO maturity roadmap program that we do, doing NIST CSF assessments. And then we do a lot of other advisory services. So that's kind of the big picture overview. Super proud of what we've built as a small company, multiple times Consulting Magazine Best Places to Work, 6 or 7 times Atlanta Best Places to Work. And then I just released a book back in June that became a best-selling book specifically for security leaders on how they can build security teams and operationalize that from a leadership perspective. So that's some of what we do. So let's frame up the challenge just a little bit in terms of where you are at today. Chris, you want to maybe talk about where companies are?
Yeah, so specifically where we find a lot, when we actually get brought into the conversation, most of the time it's a CTO, CIO, potentially a CISO if the company's a little bit further ahead, but they're sitting down with us and they're in one of a couple of different spots. They have been given the task of getting some sort of security compliance nailed down because there is a revenue generating requirement that they have to support. So they may have a customer or a market that they're trying to break into, or a customer they're trying to retain or acquire that has a ISO certification requirement, a SOC 2 certification requirement. If they just started out and they're realizing that they have a PCI requirement, there's some requirement that the company needs to achieve to drive revenue that they are on the hook for supporting in some way. Uh, that's that's one large bucket of conversations we have. The other conversation we have is we've been doing this for a little while, and we have a lot of the burden of compliance is becoming too great for me to just side desk myself, right? So if I'm the CTO, maybe I've been, you know, doing this for a while, and as the company grows, my responsibilities have grown, and I can no longer, you know, brute force my way through ISO and SOC 2 every year at this point. It's becoming just too unwieldy. So what do I do? Like, and this leads to the rest of the conversation. Do I find a partner, an external partner? Do I hire? Do I just eat it? How should I proceed? And what are the key things that I need to think about so I can talk to my leadership and present a good case for what we should do?
Yep. I think that's right. I mean, we talked to a lot of CTO. I mean, CEO of a company, but also security practitioner. This happens in a lot of elements of life where you're like, or in the business, is like you find yourself in this weird situation where, especially in security, where maybe you can hire one full-time employee, but the reality is you need someone with like 10 different areas of subject matter expertise. So is that realistic to ask that one person, or should you get a team to handle that for you? Or can you build out a team? What about hiring third parties? Because sometimes you miss and the third party is no good. So like those are some of the conversations we're having with CTOs, and I think we can help answer some of that today. I'm going to hop in here. We'll go to the next slide, maybe. Here we go. All right. So talking about options. So we think there's generally three options when you're thinking about building a security compliance program. We're going to talk through option number one, which is do nothing. Like continue to do it with the team you have. Treat it as a shared responsibility amongst your team. That might be what you need to do. Option two, hire a full-time employee or build a whole team to do it. In some cases, that makes sense. And then option number three that we'll explore is the vCISO option. When does that make sense? So as we go through here, we'll talk about some of the when it works and when it doesn't work. So I'll start off here. So I think we need to acknowledge that one viable option for your organization is to do nothing. Do not hire a team. Do not hire a vCISO. Just ask your team to continue to do it as a shared responsibility. And that's a lot more common than you might think if you're a member of a GRC team. And how this usually manifests itself is you have a COO, for example, who's just managing the compliance program with his team as an an additional duty, or you have a CTO who's just inherited, like say the SOC 2 program, and they're making that work with the engineering team, and so on and so forth. So you're just handling it as an existing team. And I think there's a very real time where that makes sense. And the number one time where that makes sense is because you have no choice. You're a technology company who simply does not have the cash flow or the budget to build a team or hire a vCISO. This is very common in terms of early stage startups, I would say. They're doing more with less, but it's also common with larger organizations that are just struggling and they can't financially make it make sense. So if that's you, you might just have to do it with the existing team. The other time I think this makes sense is I've seen organizations where there are people who are just passionate about doing it as an additional duty. They want to do it, they get it, they have the capacity to do it in terms of bandwidth every day. And maybe this is a developmental role. So for example, I've seen like an IT analyst who was on the help desk, super talented. They're able to rise to the occasion and also manage the compliance program. And over time, maybe they aspire to become the security or the GRC team lead. So you might be able to temporarily get by with that and build and add additional responsibilities simply because they're excited about it. The other time this works is if you just have a simple program, a very small team, not a complex technology stack, one compliance framework. Maybe you can get by with it. And the last time the last thing I'll mention that I think it makes sense is you have time. A lot of the folks that come to Chris and I, there is an acute need. There is an immediate need to achieve compliance, usually driven by a contract or something with a big customer. And they have to achieve ISO 27001 certification. They have to achieve SOC 2 or whatever it is. They have agreed with their customer to do it by end of year or whatever that date is, and they do not have time to slow roll it. If that's you, you can't wait. But if you can just slow roll it, you have plenty of time. Maybe you take some risk and try to just do it with the existing team with these other criteria. On the other side, uh, Chris, can you maybe just walk us through like when does doing nothing not make sense?
Yeah. So the main thing is when you don't have the capabilities on your team to cover down, first of
Yeah.
all, if like you can't squeeze blood from a stone if that, in general, like you can't, if you don't have the ability to do it, like you can't do it. I think the other thing that here, we talk about speed, if you have to go fast, obviously that's a clear indication that like you need to bring someone on. If your team doesn't want to do it, if there's a lot on the line and you can't afford to mess up, that's so to take maybe clarify that one a bit more. There are a lot of times where the CTO, the CISO is given a directive and you have one shot at that target. Like you can't afford to miss. You can't afford to go through the certification process and fail because the implications of failure are too great. So you may have the capabilities even in this case. But you cannot afford to, to not be successful. And you need some additional assurance. Like that is something that's another time. I think one other piece here that's pretty important when it doesn't make sense to do nothing, rather, is you have to have when there is a very clear problem, right? So what we see a lot of times when organizations who choose to do nothing and it actually makes sense for them is because there's not a clearly articulatable problem with what's going on right now. Yes, people are busy and it's uncomfortable, but it doesn't get momentum. It doesn't get, it doesn't get support from a funding perspective, from a budget perspective, because there's not like the stakeholder we're talking to, the executive cannot articulate an actual problem that they need help solving, other than we're just really busy, which I get, and I obviously understand and appreciate being busy as is a challenge, but we rarely see that get support from a budget perspective. We see much more when you can bring to the table hey, we don't have the people, we don't have the capacity, there's some, we don't have the capabilities, that is when you can actually get support for things.
Yep. I mean, I think the thing you're getting at, and what I often tell people is like, I wish it was true that people were building security and compliance programs because they just wanted to do the right thing. But I rarely see companies make significant investments in security and compliance program unless there is a clear and visible business objective on the other end of it,
Mm-hmm.
like a certification you have to get, like a regulations forcing you to do it, like you need access to a certain industry vertical, like a contract's on the line. So if you're sitting here and you just think it'd be nice to mature your security program, but you can't tie it back to a really clear business objective, that's going to be hard for you to get the support and budget to do internally. So just take that into consideration. That might be a good do nothing business case. So next up, talk about should you hire a full-time employee or employees? Should you build a team? So maybe talk us through when that works, Chris.
Yeah, this is great when there is a clear line of sight to a lot of work that has to be done. I think that goes to the first piece here. But before you think about hiring someone, if you can say, okay, this is the body of work that has to be done, and you have visibility into what that is, you understand tactically what has to happen. Uh, you may have a case for actually hiring someone uh, when you are willing to invest the time as a leader to cultivate whatever the role is, whether it be a security, leader, if you're a CTO or a security manager or an analyst or whatever the role is, you have to have the ability to cultivate and train and develop that talent, and then
Yeah.
also set clear objectives for them as well. Because what we see happen a lot when organizations just are reacting and they feel like, hey, I need to go, I have this thing, I'm just going to go hire someone, but they don't have a line of sight on exactly what this CISO needs to be responsible for, what their clear objectives are, or what the security manager needs to do. That person tends to flounder, and you have now added ahead, and they have not met the objectives that you're looking for. And so we get brought into the conversation about 6 months into that, when the ball really hasn't moved, because there was no clear vision on how this was going to play out.
Yeah. Sometimes just place like I'm thinking about it from a CEO perspective, and and you're thinking as we're building teams internally, even at Risk 360, it's like one of the intangibles about hiring a full-time employee is a couple things. One is their cost isn't just their salary. Their
Mhm.
cost is their salary plus benefits plus training plus everything else. So usually just straight cost to the business is about 1.5 times that employee's base salary. And then more importantly, when I'm one of the first things I think about when I'm hiring a full-time employee is like what is that employee's future in terms of is their career progression? Do they have some of the things you were talking about, Chris? Like is there someone coaching them and giving them clear direction? How are we going to train them? Like, can I even keep them? Because what we've seen a lot is, if you hire a single person, like they want a future. They want to be able to hire a team. Eventually, they want to become, more than just a doer. Maybe they want to become a manager. So you see those employees turn over really fast, and sometimes turning over before the objectives even met. And they might not even have a clear path to how they can achieve your objective. So there are unicorns out there where you can hire one unicorn who really can make it happen, but those are hard to find. And more often than not, you're hiring someone who, and you're not setting them up for success if you're hiring a single individual. So that's like a calculation
Yeah.
you want to consider versus maybe you just hire the vCISO who's done this a million times. They have a team, they've productized it, they know exactly how to get you to your objective, and that makes a little bit more sense.
One other thing to consider here is security compliance programs are very cyclical, right? So you'll have essentially like, there's off seasons, so to speak, when it comes
Yep.
to security compliance. So if you're staffing a resource, if you're hiring for somebody, yes, there may be 2,000 hours worth of work in the aggregate, but that work is actually, concentrated in like 4 months of the year. The other 8 months of the year, this person, I mean, because there's not an ongoing internal audit, there's not an external audit, like it's the off season. You have to think about what is this person going to be doing during that time, uh, because you actually may have a ton of work that actually is you may have 2 FTEs worth of work for 4 months out of the year, but a half an FTE worth of work, or less 8 months out of the year. So how are you going to use that time? If you have a very clear idea of what that time is going to be used for, then this is a great play. But if you actually just need to something that scales up and down to meet the load of a security compliance program, then this may not be a good fit because you actually may need more than an FTE during certain parts of the year and much less than an FTE during other parts of the year.
Yeah, it's a great point. I also want to just acknowledge that there is a time where you probably really should be considering building a team. And in terms of stages of growth, so like Risk 360's typical client base is business to business technology companies that also deal with a lot of compliance and regulation. So that's like healthcare tech, fintech, financial services. Those are common industries that we serve. And if you're in that space, there's probably this area in terms of company maturity where you have product market fit, you're really getting traction, your organization's starting to scale, and there is a predictable amount of compliance work. So like you have enough contracts, you have enough compliance frameworks, you have enough complexity where like you just predictably know I have a lot of stuff to do and it's not getting less complex, it's probably going to get more complex. And then when you see yourself getting there, that's a really good time to like hire a leader in to build a small team. Usually a team of like let's say 3. You hire the head and then let them build a small team. So if you're there, I think that's a good time to start building a team. And even with teams like that, as you scale the organization, that team's probably thinking about what they can offload in terms of major work streams so that they can focus on their highest and best use. So it's not like you can't hire consultants and have full-time employees. We work with teams all the time that want to outsource risk assessments or internal audits or cybersecurity maturity assessments or pen testing or elements of their program working with the full-time team. So if you're kind of at that level of maturity, let's say you're a CTO or COO and you have a sufficient amount of complexity and it's pretty obvious that that's here to stay, that's probably a good time to maybe consider the full-time employee route. All right. Now let's hop into and we'll reverse this time, Chris. I'll talk about when it works, you talk about when it doesn't. When you should hire a vCISO. Um, so I think there's a couple things that I think about. I think the number one, at least from our experience, the couple of reasons that we when we're talking to customers and we think that, yeah, it's pretty obvious the vCISO is a good fit here. Number one is they need to move fast. They have a clear time constraint, compliance objective with little margin for error, and they need someone who has a well-worn playbook. They've done it over and over again, and they can do it with a high degree of success in a very defined period of time, who also has enough resources to make that happen. And like we take a team approach to the vCISO services, so we can surge resources if we need to compress timelines, for example. That's a pretty obvious time when I think that's happening. Other times I think a vCISO makes sense is if you're just not you don't know where the organization is going in terms of security maturity. You can't paint a picture for where you should be in 2 or 3 or 5 years, and you need someone to come in and establish that baseline, paint the vision, and part of that vision might be making it clear when you should start building a team in terms of your maturity. So the vCISO can come and put you like the 3 year cybersecurity roadmap, help you get some quick wins to get your maturity where it needs to be, and then start giving you some confidence and clarity about what the next couple of years look like. And sometimes, if you're CTO or CEO trying to plan for the future, that can be very powerful and help you set your organization up for success when you do need to hire full-time employees. The other thing that we see often is it's very common that we'll work with organizations that have a team of one or two. And those one or two people are just very, very busy, but they're not subject matter experts in every single task. So a common example is maybe we're coming in to work with a technical team. They're really good at application security and vulnerability management and incident response, but they do not have any compliance subject matter expertise. So they need to bring in some experts to help solve that piece of the puzzle. Or you have the opposite problem where you have GRC and compliance experts, but someone who's not an expert in AppSec, incident response on the other side of the house, and a vCISO might can supplement that side of the house. So if you think about your program as a puzzle, maybe the vCISO fits in somewhere to help you complete your full team of the puzzle. And that's kind of where it gets into like more common than not is like folks have teams, they have people doing stuff, but they just need reinforcements. They need to be able to surge resources, surge subject matter experts to be able to accomplish an objective. And I think hiring a vCISO or consultant of some kind is typically a pretty good option in that situation too. What about the doesn't work side, Chris?
Yeah, so maybe just to round out, maybe another one thought on the when it works side. So
Yeah.
as a just a very simple model for thinking about like how do you for small organizations, like what are the key roles that you have to fill on the security side, right? So there's typically four. I'm sure there's more, but just as a simple thought model, you typically need someone to think about your security strategy, right? Like the executive, this is also the person that or the role that sits between the security program and then the executive level to translate and take up business objectives and translate them into security, objectives and that role. You need someone who's going to handle GRC because there's revenue on the line or there's you know litigation or liability or there's liability on the line. There's some sort of rationale or like big driver there, risk there. You need someone to do security engineering, and you need someone to run like your security incident response and monitoring and logging and all that stuff to monitor things. So when you think about a vCISO, think about like those roles that need to be filled and where you have strength and where you have maybe a gap. And that may be a good opportunity to bring in essentially a supplement from an external party. So when does that not work? When does bringing someone in not work? Number one is when the executive team or the leadership is not willing to invest in the relationship. We rarely see vCISO type models work when the leadership is not willing to create or cultivate a relationship with that provider, and not just so. This is the difference between if you just want someone to come in and paint a fence for you, that is that's fine. But what you really are the main value and when it really is a massive value add and a force multiplier for you is when you have someone to come in who's going to help you think about like the entire architect, like the entire landscape architecture of your backyard. The fence being is one piece of that, right? So you want someone who can bounce ideas off of, you can get critical feedback from, who can help you understand like when it's going to work, when it's not going to work, and then also can have relational. You can invest in the relationship in terms of communication and all that.
One of the words I use, Chris, is like as a leader, there's a difference between delegating something and abdicating your responsibility for something. And I
Yeah.
think sometimes those get conflated because leaders are really busy. And the
Mhm.
reason they're bringing a vCISO in is because they don't want to think about this problem anymore. They just want it handled, which is fair. But that doesn't mean that they can just abdicate the responsibility totally and never develop a relationship. You need to consider the vCISO like a member of your team, and you need to give them guidance. You need to make the business objectives clear and then expect them and hold them accountable to executing against those business objectives, and it becomes a partnership. The times it's ever went sideways when I'm talking to colleagues is when that didn't exist. You're operating in a silo, you get
Yeah.
out of alignment, and then you're just not going to get the value you want out of a vCISO.
Yep, that's right. And then to Christian's earlier point on either this slide or previous slide, if you're scaling, and it may make sense to invest in FTEs and actually build out a security program. If you're not good at integrating or managing vendors, like this is not culturally, this is not a fit for your business. That's just not who you are. You don't do it. You don't have a good track record of that working. Then I mean, I don't know why it would work now. So that is another consideration. And then maybe the last one, Christian's point is when you're not going to attach the vCISO or the partner to the business, in particular as the business evolves and as the needs change and it matures.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that managing vendors and vendor relationships is a skill in of itself.
For
I mean, I
sure.
remember early on when we started hiring vendors, I was terrible at it. Like I wasn't good at holding them accountable, wasn't good at setting objectives. I was even adversarial at times where I'd be challenging them in an unhealthy way. But as I've matured and learned from the best executives, like if you're good at that, you can develop that skill to really get the most out of your vendors, no matter who the vendor is. I mean, that's a force multiplier. So it might be a good opportunity for you to hold up the mirror and say, like, hey, is this going to work for my business? Can we intake any vendor and manage them successfully? Or am I committed to sharpening that skill a little bit? So just something to think about.
Hmm. Yep.
So we'll move into like, all right, you've decided to hire a vCISO. So one of the things that like again, like sitting at the coffee shop with some of the executives that we've coached before and just having a candid conversation and they're vetting partners. It's like, what's the inside baseball on like what you should look at in a vCISO partner? Because the reality is, I think we're in the world right now where there's a lot of people with side gigs. There's a lot of freelancers. There's a lot of IT companies that say they also provide security services. There's just a lot of options and choices. So it can become murky to understand like what you're getting, what is a fair expectation, and how to make sure you're getting a good deal for your business objective. So that's kind of the context here, what we want to walk through to give you some of that inside baseball of what you might want to consider looking at. So the first thing that we want to talk about is aligning with your business needs. So I'll tackle this one, Chris. And I think that might sound obvious. I think we've been alluding to that earlier, but vCISOs often come in a few flavors. There's the contractor. It's just you're getting a person who is going to allocate a certain amount of hours towards your project on a part-time basis and do tasks for you. Another model is you have someone who actually has a full-time job, but this is a side gig for them, and they're going to do a few hours a week to do some tasks for you. And then you have other companies, I think Risk 360 fits in this bucket, where they've productized this. We have a full team to do it. We have a platform to do it. It's a core competency. And I actually think for most companies, there's a place for all three of those types of things. Like if you're a tiny company, the guy with the side gig that's very inexpensive, but giving you some side advice might be perfectly fine. The contractor might be perfectly fine. And other times, you need someone who can really manage this, can really scale up, help you accomplish an objective quickly. And I think the best way for you to calculate what you are really looking for is getting very clear about why you're doing this. And Chris touched on this early. It's like, what is the business requirement? Is the revenue on the other end of it? What's the timeline that you need? Are you trying to enter new markets? So you're a healthcare company trying to enter the healthcare vertical. You know that there are compliance requirements. You need to do that. So maybe just sitting down for a moment before you actually go hiring anyone or a vCISO and taking inventory of what the heck why you're doing this. What does the business require of this thing that you're about to hire, this vCISO? And then as you go to vet different vCISOs, see if they pick up what you're putting down. Do they understand the unique nature of your business requirement and the objective that you're trying to meet? Have they been there before? Do they get it? And do they have a program that inherently aligns to your business objective? And I would make that a key part of my assessment activity. And I often see this step skipped, where maybe you start with a Google search and you hire a couple, like someone with a nice website, but you haven't thought about the alignment and how these different business models work. But I think this is a really important point. Chris, anything you want to add to this one?
So I think in terms of like the actual resourcing and delivery model, whether it be like a an individual consultant or someone who's a side gig, or a some an organization like ours that has a more like a much more robust productized version. Also think about the like the capabilities specifically, right? Like what are they good at? Because you could have a big old, a larger, a shop that is very productized, but what they're good at is not what you need, right? So if we go back to those four gap areas, like they're really good at this one, and you actually need this other thing, from a model perspective, and that's just not a good fit. So also think about where your competency, capability, capacity gap is that you're trying to fill, and you need either someone to come in and just own that, and you give them the initiative to just run with it, or they have like it's the area that you need very specific help in.
Yeah. I mean, even at Rest 360, we have this problem with our customers because we can do a lot of things. So if we have a company, someone who comes in and says, I need to accomplish this compliance objective by end of year, got it. We can do that. Alternatively, if they come in and say, you know what I'm really looking for is a cybersecurity roadmap with a budget, with a set of best practices and how we can achieve that risk management posture. Well, that's quite a different approach. So our best customers kind of have a sense for what they need, or are at least willing to work with us to uncover that need, and then we can fulfill that. So just something I think everyone should be thinking about. So we'll move on to the second. In terms of habits for, I think there's a core set of habits that you look for in a vCISO. Chris, you want to talk through some of these?
Yeah, absolutely. So uh, we are again, we talked about it in the previous slide, but there it should be a very intentional decision on if you're bringing on an individual contractor, individual contributor, or if you're bringing on a team. Uh, we see the best. We tend to see the best results, at least for our clients, for in the team model for a lot of different reasons. Again, not saying there's not a role for those individual contributor vCISOs. It's just not the clients that we typically work with, who need because they need speed, they need a diverse capability set. They need something that can bring to the table a lot of different things and be able to navigate the unexpected. And when you have someone who's doing it part time or has a few hours allocated a month, or is more of they've been a CISO for 20 years and they're doing this, you have 8 hours a month with them. They're just not able to serve those needs particularly well or own problems when you're
Yeah.
only allocated that much time. So just something to think about. Other habits, the best vCISOs that we see are able to have a conversation with the COO or the CFO, and then turn around and have a conversation with this, a SOC manager, right? They can navigate the technical and the business side of security very fluidly. They can translate well between one side and another, and they can grease the skids on understanding business objectives, understanding technical constraints, and being able to bridge the two things. Right. That's a very powerful tool. We highly recommend that you look for. We talked about business objective alignment already, but just to repeat it, they understand what your business objectives are, and they understand and can articulate the security or compliance big rocks pathway to achieve and navigating those business objectives. And then, there's a couple of other ones here that we can talk through, but the biggest one I want to hone in on here is clarity and communication, right? So the best vCISOs are, whether it's, they will tell you the truth and they'll be very clear about what the plan is, how we're navigating the plan, and what the reality of the situation is. And that doesn't mean it's always going to be favorable. That doesn't mean it's always going to be, happy, but it is true and it is at least clear. There's never murkiness in terms of what's going to happen next. There's always clarity in terms of the current state and what is needed, what the risks are to achieving objectives.
Yeah, I think I'll give you a couple of tactical examples to bring this home of how we've seen this like manifest itself in the real world. So one is like we've had clients before that for years all they did was SOC 2. And then all of a sudden they expanded into a different market and they had to do HIPAA and ISO 27001. Well, what happens if the vCISO you hire doesn't have that expertise. Well, that presents a problem to your strategy. So like the team approach at Risk 360, like we have broad expertise, we can bring different people in. So you might want to just consider like how do they handle increasing complexity? How does it scale? Another example is I've had colleagues that will hire a vCISO and there's just zero communication. They're like, everything's ad hoc. I don't get status reports. I always have to reach out to them to find out where things are at. And that can induce a lot of anxiety and be very frustrating. So one of the things that we institute at Risk 360 is a weekly written status report. You can log into our portal, see exactly where your program is, and then on a biweekly basis, we do a virtual or in-person meeting to cover it, and it's in a standard format. So the intent of that kind of communication cadence is just to create clarity and continuous updates and make it predictable for the customers. So as you're assessing a vCISO or considering them, you might want to dive into how do you communicate? How do I know what deliverables you're going to get me and when? How do I track my project plan? And if it feels like they're making that up for the first time, that doesn't inspire confidence. You want someone who's been there and done that before. So look for some of those things as you vet your vCISO. And that kind of segues into a playbook to build a program. So I think I've seen this handled several different ways. And the most common way is typically you're buying a bucket of someone's hours. Like they don't really have a plan. They're just going to come in with their bucket of hours and do things. It's often unstructured, and I think the downside of that, the upside of it is there's some flexibility. The downside of that is that you as the buyer still have to do the thinking. So you might have to come up with the tasks that you want done and then go ask the vCISO to do them. And that can be frustrating because you actually didn't outsource the problem. You still have to think deeply about it. And maybe you don't have the expertise to do that thinking. Whereas someone who has a defined and well-worn playbook can guide you through the process to meet your goal. So you might want to balance those things. I also think about things like available resources, like the SOC 2 ISO example I gave. Like, do they have people with different types of subject matter expertise? Can you surge resources during audit season to help me move really quick if I need to? Uh, if I ask you to write a policy, are you going to spend 10 hours writing a policy, or do you just have a bunch of templates and you can move a lot faster and be efficient? Do you have other clients dealing with the same type of problem so that you can rely on those lessons learned to apply to me? So those are some of the things that I'm thinking about as we work with customers and advise them on Visa. So I also want to introduce y'all to one concept that was a helpful thinking model to me when it comes to looking for a trusted partner. So Chris and I talk a lot about we want to be the trusted advisor. We want to be like the person someone calls to talk through hard things with, like have that kind of deep relationship. And I think there's three levels of initiative. And I use this model a lot to think about people. The lowest level initiative is level one initiative. That's when people do what they're told. So you have to tell the vCISO what to do, and then they go do it. That's okay, but it requires you to come up with the task and run the show. And that can be very frustrating. Level two initiative is they will ask for permission and then they will go do. That's better, but it still requires you to make the go no go decision. Like it requires your time to do the thinking and approve things. Where Chris and our team strive to operate is level three initiative. That's where we have earned your trust. We have the sufficient amount of context to go do things and just let you know that they were done. And that implies that we understand how you would make a decision. We understand the business objectives. We have the competency. We have the trust. And so we're always working to get to level three initiative. So maybe you can use that as a thinking model as you assess any partner in the future and figure out where do they fall on that spectrum and is it appropriate based on my unique needs. Anything you want to add to this one, Chris?
The other thing about when we think of ourselves at when we finally get to the point where we feel like we are that trusted partner, trusted advisor, is we functionally think about the problem when we're not on the phone with you. Like we're thinking about your program when we're not doing like in a meeting because we think of it as like part of our problem now. Like we think of it, we begin to share, in some way, share responsibility for helping you be successful versus it you being the only person who's thinking about the problem or how to make the program better or how to make things more efficient. And we try to think about that on your behalf as well.
Yeah, for sure. So two more here. I think about breadth of capabilities. Um, Again, I kind of think it comes back to those few models that we talked about, like the part-timer, the contractor versus the team. And you understand, I mean, for one, a lot of people don't even know the security universe. So like you might not even have the capacity to think about the 20 different types of things you might need. So that would be something I would be looking for an education from a vCISO in an authentic way if they can provide it. Or if you do have a sense, thinking through what do they bring to the table. So for common things is like sometimes a vCISO can only do the advisory, but they're not going to help you gather any of the audit evidence, or they don't have compliance expertise. Sometimes they don't have the ability to do penetration testing, so you have to go find a separate vendor to bring in for penetration testing. Sometimes they don't have a bench of trusted partners that they can bring in for different things. So thinking about what you need out of them and the diverse set of capabilities they have and do not have, and making that a part of your assessment criteria. Chris, what else would you think about in terms of capabilities?
Uh, the scaling, I think scaling in team is really important. The ability to surge when things are unexpected. I think it's also the ability to navigate unexpected and unstructured problems. Uh, a lot of, it's very easy, not very easy. There is a lot, there are a lot of firms out there that are going to be very good at one thing, and they are just very good at that one thing, right? But I think we all, for all the folks who've been doing security and just business for long enough, you rarely, what do they say, like best plans rarely survive first contact, right? So the ability to navigate uh, uncertainty and also the ability to be flexible and uh, navigate unstructured problems to meet objectives is a very important capability in a partner, so that they can continue to be with you no matter what changes may occur in the problem statement or the scenario.
Yeah, I think this is a good time to address one of the questions that came in because this happens a lot. I know there's people out there trying to, for example, achieve compliance objectives. And one of the questions that comes up a lot is, there's all these automation platforms out there. Like, do I really need a person if I can just buy this audit automation platform, plug it in, and then it'll help me achieve compliance? And I understand why that's confusing because of the marketing speak out there and some of the language. But I think one of the important things to understand is that a security program and a compliance program and your ability to do something like ISO 27001 and SOC 2, there's a huge level of governance. So not technology that is involved. There's a things like risk assessments, internal audits, policy sets, strategy, oversight. They all exist outside of any platform. So if you don't understand that inherently, and that's not intuitive to you, that's all signs are pointing to you need to bring someone who does understand that because there's no platform that's going to be turnkey compliance if you don't have some of those basics. So in many cases, it's going to be a vCISO working in tandem with one of the automation platforms, which we have, like Full Circle is an example of that. We have our own SaaS platform, Full Circle. I would never advise someone to adopt Full Circle and pretend like that's going to help them completely achieve their compliance objectives without someone using the tool. So to me, there's this healthy mix of experts, experts having playbooks, and also having the technology that's the full suite of what you need to build a security program and achieve any compliance objective. So I hope that answers that question that came through. Last thing that we'll talk about is track record of success. So I think this is true of almost any vendor, but probably my biggest recommendation when it comes to assessing a vCISO is just ask them what they've done before. Like, are there customers that you can talk to that will vouch for them that are similar to you and say that they did a good job and talk inside baseball with them? Like, how did they do? How did it go? What are the intangibles? What are the things you wish that you knew before? And just see how it goes. I think that is so telling. The best vendors that I have ever hired, I talked to a few customers and heard the good and the bad, and that was meaningful in my decision making process. I think the other thing that is really important when you're hiring a vendor and especially a vCISO is understanding what the measurable outcome looks like. I think it's difficult to hold anyone accountable if there's ambiguity in terms of what success looks like. So when we come in, like we want to be really clear about what we're being held accountable to because we want you to know we want everyone to know when we're successful. We want you to feel good that we achieve success. We want to know that we hit the target. So that might be a set of deliverables. That might be some risk mitigation. That might be achieving a compliance objective. But whatever that goal is, like let's make it clear what the outcome is and celebrate hitting that outcome. The times I've seen it go sideways is when someone hires a vCISO for an ambiguous problem statement and you're a year into the relationship and you're like, I do not know if we've gotten any better. I can't point to anything measurable that like that was a good investment for my company. And that's a very disappointing feeling. And it might not even be true. It might be there was plenty of progress, but you've set no measurables. So that's an important thing for you in the vCISO to consider. And then last thing, I'll just say beware. Ton of freelancers out there, people who are putting a few hours of work. They can talk a good game, but they have never been a consultant. They've never helped an organization achieve an objective. They're just a freelancer, and there's some great ones out there, but there's also some folks that aren't going to give you the service that you want. So just look out for that and understand if they're committed to this relationship or if it's something they're just experimenting with, because you may not want to be their experiment. So just consider that. Anything you want to add to this in terms of record of success?
I mean, I think the best organizations that out there, the ones that I would want to we want to partner with in general, are the ones who have, we call them raving fans, right? So look for organizations that have raving fans. They have customers, either current or previous customers, that advocate for them, right? That say that openly, advocate, openly speak highly of them, and whether unsolicited, right? Whether it be on LinkedIn or at different events or what have you. Those are the ones that you want to partner with. And I mean, for us, those are, I mean, our ability to cultivate raving fans truly is like the measure of how successful we are as a business, right? Like our ability to make our clients not just successful, but excited and happy and thrilled with like the relationship, and whether they are with us for a short period of time or a long period of time, depending on their needs. Like we want them to not just have a good experience, but an overwhelmingly positive experience.
Yeah, I'll encourage everyone to Google Risk 360 strategy flywheel. We have this flywheel that we think kind of makes up our business, and you'll see that one of the parts of our flywheel is creating raving fans. It's like core to our business model. And if you want to know like the inner workings of Risk 360, the area we focus our attention and investment, that flywheel model will give you some inside baseball into how we operate. And it's a fun little tool. So let's wrap it up here. I want to talk a little bit about how we help, just in case you're interested and you're thinking about Risk 360. So number one is like a huge track record of success. I think on average, we help organizations cut costs by about 42%, but more importantly, we're helping them achieve their business objectives. Just an extremely strong track record of helping organizations define and hit whatever objective it is. We also try to do a great job of adding clarity of what we do. So removing ambiguity. We have a full suite of types of services, from a team with expertise to ability to governance and compliance. We have a really strong security team with Corey Wolf. By the way, if you're not watching our weekly cybersecurity executive brief, you should do that. Check it out on YouTube. So deep bench of just security expertise. And then also our platform Full Circle that we're very proud of. This is our GRC platform. And the last thing I'll point you guys to in terms of those raving fans, on our website, there's tons of case studies. I'll point you to these three. And it's not just written case studies. The reason I think that these are so valuable is because it is these individuals talking about their story, where they'll tell you the decision points. Risk 360 totally can't take all the credit. These are people who are very talented in their own right, building great security programs with great insight, talking about how they made decisions, how they built teams, and how Risk 360 played into that. And you can change out the Risk 360 name with any vendor. I think these stories are important, and they're worth the hour piece to go listen to them. So check those out on our website. We try to do a monthly webinar with different customers and thought leaders. So I think that's really, really valuable. So we'll pause there for just a minute and spend the next couple minutes if anyone has questions. So Andy, if you see any questions come through, or I guess I can open up the Q&A.
Yeah, there's a couple there. Yep.
Awesome. All right, sure. I'll read them out. Oh, this is a good question. Someone said, how many clients can a vCISO manage? I actually glossed over that earlier. So one of the things that I always ask a vendor is like, do you have the time to support me? Like how many hours a week? Like, are you a vCISO with 100 clients and literally I'm getting 1 hour of your week? Or what does that look like? I don't have a good sense because I think vCISOs are managing, like they might have a huge client that takes all their time. They might have, 3 different clients that only take a piece of their time. So it's kind of hard to put a number on how many max clients. But I will tell you, people are running at capacity and you need to be very clear and get a commitment for how they're going to support you. So if you're engaging a contractor, get a commitment for a certain amount of effort, or at least the achievement of a certain objective by a certain time period. That's really important. I know at vCISO we have a whole staffing model, so we take a team approach. We have project leads typically who are supported by project staff. So we think about our staffing mix very carefully so people have enough capacity in their year at different times and different workloads to be able to adequately support those customers. So we take that very, very seriously. So the way I would answer that question is say, talk to your vCISO about that and get a sense for if they have the capacity to support you. Someone asked directly, how much do you charge month to month for vCISO services to manage SOC 2, ISO, and privacy for a mid-market SaaS company? Dude, it totally depends. Like seriously, talk to us. We won't sell you. We'll scope it out, figure out what you need. And the reason I say that is because you might want us to outsource the whole program, which we can do, or you might just want us to outsource a sliver of the program or do certain different things for you, which would cost less in that case. So we can kind of understand the level of services you're needing. We can give you a price. I mean, within one phone call, it's not a lot of effort. So if you want to take us up on that, just shoot us a note after this. Andy, do you see any other questions out there?
No, that's it. I think we covered the Q&A and the ones in the chat. I think we're good to go, y'all.
Awesome. Well, I'll give y'all one more resource before we go. So, hey, thank you all for spending some time with us. We really appreciate it. From here, go check out our YouTube channel. One of the things that we pride ourselves on is trying to outteach the competition. If you go to Risk360 YouTube channel and you click playlist, we have playlists where we interview CISOs. We have playlists, our weekly cybersecurity executive breach. We have playlist on different compliance frameworks and security topics. So I think it's just one of the best unseen resources that we have, and would add a ton of value for you guys. But again, we appreciate everybody's time. Thank you, Chris, and thanks everybody. We appreciate it.